Okie dokie. So I do, speaking of celebrations, I have had the chance to read over your larger celebrations, and I will be returning those celebrations to you at the end of class. And I just like a couple things I wanted to touch on that I wanted to make sure we were on the same page concerning before we moved on. We're on the same rock, that we were standing on the same rock in the stream before we moved on. It has to be a big rock. So one of those is with the river continuum concept. So a lot of y'all talked well about this idea about like headwaters, terrestrial input important, further downstream not as important. I just kind of wanted to mention, so thinking about the RCC, it really helps, I think, to think of it in like 3 zones. And those zones have to do with importance of energy sources. So upstream, think like Bent Creek for headwaters. Like when you because it's always good to have a concrete example. So when you think of headwaters, think like maybe Bent Creek. Y'all have. Is there anyone here who hasn't been to Bent Creek? And it's okay if you haven't. Okay, because I think probably most of our students, by the time they get to upper level, they've been there. So think Bent Creek, right? So far upstream. What characterizes the stream ecosystem in those headwaters? If you were like over Thanksgiving to talk about what characterizes a headwater stream ecosystem, what are some of the things you mentioned? Usually pretty shallow, fast flowing. Yep, lots of coarse woody debris, Cooler, yes, all these things. Awesome, and then how does that relate to the processing of energy up there? We say that it's heterotrophic, and as a sidebar, you probably learned in, I don't know, maybe high school, what a heterotroph and an autotroph are from like an organismic perspective. Like this is an autotroph because it makes its own food. This is a heterotroph because it has to like capture its own food. But this is a little different. This is thinking of like an ecosystem as autotrophic or heterotrophic, where like an ecosystem is autotrophic if it produces more energy than it consumes, if that makes sense, right? So we have heterotrophic ecosystems. All that means is that they're consuming more energy than they're producing. So whatever their producers are, the consumers aren't as reliant on those local producers as they are on producers somewhere else whose energy is washing in there. So why are these far upstream areas heterotrophic? Yeah, a lot of the energy that's available in this stream is derived from terrestrial leaves, terrestrial organic matter that falls in, as our paper today talks about, right? So those are net heterotrophic. That is, they're using more energy than they're producing, which just shows you, once again, that it's hard for us to draw boundaries around ecosystems because there's really it's all connected. The Lion King, one of the main messages in all of environmental science, it's all connected. Other people said that too. And then we move downstream, right? So as we move downstream, what happens that makes our ecosystem a little different in these middle sections? Exactly, there's more light available, right? The canopy opens up, more light. What else? It's warmer. So, say that again. Less flow velocity. Probably lower flow velocity. The gradient's lower. Imagine this up in the mountains. Here we're getting down a little lower elevation. So for these middle sections, think like, honestly, you could think of the French Broad River in the big picture as middle sections. Because these further downstream areas, they're really thinking of like the Mississippi, Ohio, these huge rivers. So you can think French Broad, I don't know, like, I think Davidson River, downstream areas, Mills River, downstream areas, you're starting to get into that. All right, so here it opens up, canopy opens up. I would put that again in this category, kind of transitional between the two, because the canopy's open, right? In some sections, right? Some parts where it's wider, it's getting lots of light, other part it isn't. So I would say that's kind of transitional between these two, yeah. And again, there's variation. So if you're sitting in a pool in the Swannanoa, it's going to be more like these lower sections. Finer substrate, deeper water. If you got a riffle, it looks a lot like headwaters. Bedrock, swift flow, that kind of thing. All right, so down here, it's autotrophic because those producers are capturing more energy than the consumers are consuming. So what that means then is that it's going to be exporting its own energy, whereas here, it's exporting more energy from the terrestrial side of things. Okay, and then as we move all the way down, why would someplace like the Mississippi River, again, turn back heterotrophic if our middle sections are autotrophic? What is Mercury? Yeah, so we don't have all the benthic production that we had in these middle sections. Now, we might have plankton, but that's still not going to be on a scale of the benthic production. Yeah. And then what might be going on as far as respiration is concerned in these downstream sections that would make respiration higher down here than in these middle areas? There's kind of two real sources of respiration. Burning up oxygen. When organic matter decomposes, does that burn up oxygen? It does, right? Because a lot of our decomposers, including invertebrates and bacteria, are what we call aerobic. They need oxygen to survive, right? So as organic matter decomposes, that burns up oxygen. So this is a low flow area, deeper water. There's going to be a lot of organic matter settling in there in these deeper areas. So respiration is happening. It's burning up oxygen. So because we've got lower autotrophic productivity here, and we've got more decomposition happening, these downstream sections, again, are not heterotrophic. So they're reliant on this energy to be coming down. Any other questions or thoughts on the river continuum concept? So this is something that you could probably relate to every topic that we cover in this class. You could think about, how does it fit into the RCC? In some cases, how does it contradict the RCC? Any questions or thoughts on it? Right here and now. You'll notice there's no discussion of temporal variability here. Now, the paper we'll talk about later explains that, yeah, we've got CPOM moving from here down to here, but it's not like a slow, constant trickle, right? It's going to be these big pulses at certain parts of the year. So this doesn't talk about temporal variation. So you can think about that. Yeah. So, yeah, good point. So, and good job, reading that. That's hard to say. Yeah, so I think the idea is that before you can have zooplankton, you need to have phytoplankton because that's what they'll feed on. So you can imagine if we were to plot phytoplankton densities from 0 to whatever the max is here, we get just maybe just a couple. But then at some point, we get enough phytoplankton there that it supports zooplankton, right? And so I think you'd see phytoplankton first, and then as you get enough phytoplankton biomass to support that next trophic level, you'd start seeing the zooplankton showing up. Yeah, probably right. Probably the last thing of all these organisms to get added on to our community there. The whole question about dams, too, this whole thing could happen over a scale of several miles if we impound a mountain stream, right? So thinking about how human activities affect this as well. If you have a dam, you get deep water really soon, slow flowing, a little more turbid plankton community. So yes, we talked the other day, when we create a dam, we can kind of accelerate this whole process too. All right, cool. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, we haven't visited perhaps a true headwater stream But Bee Tree Creek is, maybe, I don't know, in here. If the Swannanoa River's here, like Bee Tree Creek's here, Bee Tree Creek when it crosses the parkway is like here, maybe. Okay. But then it flows into Bee Tree Reservoir and things get weird. All right. And I didn't talk a whole lot about the invertebrates, but just realize downstream you have lots and lots of collectors because there's all this organic matter that's moved downstream, and we have consumers there that have evolved to take advantage of that. Whereas upstream, we have more shredders, grazers in the middle where there's all this canopy. And so the macroinvertebrate community is kind of responding to these differences in energy availability along the way. Cool stuff, man. All right. So our last couple of classes, we've been talking about algae and productivity autotrophs, different forms. And then we talked about macrophytes. I thought I might just mention the term algae is not like super duper scientific. It's only slightly scientific. So algae can refer to periphyton or phytoplankton. Because like when you see like phytoplankton will grow in these dense mats like on the surface of ponds and stuff, and it'll sometimes referred to as pond scum, but like they don't like that really at all. So in those cases, phytoplankton can be referred to as algae. So when you hear the word algae, it can refer to the attached stuff or the stuff that's in the water column growing more free. But with these macrophytes, we talked about the fact that they're not as edible as periphyton. So because of that, a larger proportion is not eaten. And when we get a flood or some other disturbance, it gets washed downstream and enters the food web in a little different way. All right. So let's think about the way that energy moves in streams. So the HSS-Fretwell trophic theory, this idea about odd versus even numbers of trophic levels determining whether you have a lot of producers left or not, and whether you fall into the stream or not. You all, in general, did a good job on that question. HSS-Fretwell, that whole trophic theory is about this, right? It's about light being converted into carbohydrates and sugars by our producers that are then consumed by grazers, and then they're consumed by something else. This is what we call the green food web. It's green, of course, because at the bottom of the food web is our producers, which are green because of chlorophyll. There are a couple other pigments that are used to capture light, but chlorophyll is the main one, so that's why things look green. Well, there's energy moving in different ways too. Sometimes real important ways. So if we imagine our producers as aquatic macrophytes, if they aren't consumed so much by these grazers, their biomass is going to move over here, right? It's going to become, and we'll define this term in just a moment, I know we haven't talked about it yet, it's going to become this coarse particulate organic matter, these big pieces of carbon. As it's broken down, it's going to become smaller particulate organic matter, and we'll define how we tell the difference in these two in just a moment. But this is the base of what we call the brown food web. And essentially, any place where the ecosystem is net heterotrophic, the brown food web is going to be more important. Thank you. Because it just means that the energy that's produced locally is going to be less than the energy that's moving up from organic matter that has been created someplace else. So if we were to fill out this, a big, big part is terrestrial carbon. So these are predominantly leaves in temperate ecosystems in the fall, but other things too. So this is carbon that's been fixed in the terrestrial realm and has found its way into our streams. So whether it comes from aquatic macrophytes or whether it comes from terrestrial macrophytes, there's going to be this input of organic matter. And then similarly, it's going to move on up. This coarse particular organic matter is going to be continually processed and getting smaller and smaller into fine particulate organic matter. And then, again, invertebrates are so important in our aquatic food webs. Do so many different things, so many different ways. Depending on the size of that organic fraction, then it's going to be used by different consumers, right? So shredders, when they're not showing off tricks on their skateboard, they will go around breaking down coarse particulate organic matter. Collectors, on the other hand, are capturing small pieces. They can do that a few different ways. They can do that by building cool nets like caddisflies. Or they can do that by hunting around on the bottom of the stream like some mayflies and stuff do. But they're looking for small pieces. And then a similar thing, right? Those invertebrates are gonna, their energy is gonna keep moving on up the food web. And, you know, we could add a couple more trophic levels here. I mean, you know, birds, raccoons, like great white sharks, like all these things. But if we just think up, if we think up to the point of our secondary consumer, right? We just think up to the point of our secondary consumer. The energy can get to our secondary consumers in essentially two different ways, two different pathways. Right? Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so let's talk about the particulate organic matter first. Now your book talks about benthic organic matter, BOM, just meaning, you know, particles on the bottom of the stream. But the more general ways just talk about particulate organic matter. And we break it down based on size. So coarse particulate organic matter, CPOM, anything over a millimeter in size. So this ranges from blades of grass up to trees. If they fall into a stream, they're coarse particulate organic matter. This is largely based on how it's processed. That's why we come up with these differences in sizes. Because anything above a millimeter, it's going to have to be broken down really before stream organisms can process it. Okay, and then anything less than a millimeter but larger than half of a micron, half of a micrometer. So a micrometer is a thousandth of a millimeter, just to give you some scale, right? So anything smaller than 1/2000th of a millimeter is going to be, going to be categorized as dissolved organic matter. So these are processed by shredders. These are processed by collectors. These are so small. What do you think processes them? Any thoughts? What's that? So yeah, so some of them will be absorbed onto biofilms, which we'll talk about later. So some of them will be absorbed or adsorbed, if they're just associated with it, onto biofilm surfaces. But there are actually a couple of critters that can process this, believe it or not. Filter feeders. And one group of organisms, some of y'all saw at Jeremy Tieman's seminar, mussels are real important for this. They can even filter out bacteria, which is good for their filtering capacities, but not necessarily good for them. Yeah, so this finest fraction can be processed by some of our collectors, but not many. Most of our collectors are only going to be getting at this. Sometimes things like black fly larvae can get this, but mostly freshwater mussels are what are going to filter those out. Okay. So where is that CPOM coming from? Like what are the pieces? Yep, woody debris, leaf litter. Probably small children. Yes. They'd have to be very small. They'd be characterized as FPOM. They would have to be, yeah. But yeah, so all this stuff. Yeah, so really, right, anything organic that's greater than a millimeter. You can think of your own examples, but for sure, woody debris are going to be the biggest contributor in, like, I don't know, a natural upland stream. So all this stuff, you know, fruits can be super duper important in some places in the tropics, right? There are tropical fruits that rely on fish to disperse their seeds, for instance, but in the temperate zone, not quite as big of a deal. All right. So what is that energy transferred into? What does that energy become in the stream from the leaf? If the leaf falls in a stream, even if there's nobody there to hear it, does it make a sound? No, because it's so small. You can't hear it because the stream's louder than the leaf. No, I don't know. So what is that going to be turned into? CPOM, yeah. Yep. And where's that carbon ultimately going to go? So if it's eaten by a shredder, where's that carbon ultimately going to go, end up? Did I say that twice? I don't know. It's a good answer. If you're not sure what to put on any of the exams, you put downstream, right? It's probably good in stream ecology. Everything flows downstream, as you've heard. Yeah, anyway, so this, right? So it breaks down into those two fractions we've talked about already, FPOM and dissolved organic matter. But a fair amount of that carbon is going to get turned into biomass higher up in the food web, right? So it's going to be, that same carbon is going to be found in the bodies of those consumers. And then, of course, if that energy is used for respiration, it's going to end up as CO2, right? It's going to be respired into CO2. Now, of course, there's more than just carbon in this leaf. There's those of y'all who study, what are those things that they're called? Plants. Those of y'all that study plants are aware there's not just carbon in these leaves. So these are going to be sources of nutrients and things like that as well. It's kind of like the stream getting its vitamins whenever these leaves fall into there. Right? So this leaf is going to be converted into all these different things in the ecosystem. So just a couple examples of shredding organisms. You know, there are families of all the major aquatic macroinvertebrate orders that do this. This is Leptophlebiidae, a family of mayfly, which I feel like we saw maybe one or two of these in our data. Caddisflies here, they'll do it. Crayfish, they'll do it. Look at those claws, man. They'll be breaking stuff up. Stonefly, these are the roach-like stoneflies, Peltoperlidae, they're all shredders. Some of these amphipods, again. This cranefly larva, right? All these things. So it's pretty crazy how many invertebrates we have whose life is just shredding. That's what they do. You ask babies of these what they want to be when they grow up, all they say is shredder, nothing else. They don't want to be they don't want to be a fireman, of course, because there aren't any fires in streams. But all those things that kids would want to be, no, they just want to be shredders. That's what they do. That's all they do. All these organisms, it's pretty crazy. So we can look at different groups of plants and see how long it takes them to break down in the stream. So these authors looked at, a whole lot of different, so non-woody plants and woody plants. They looked at the breakdown rate per day, but the best way to think of these is in the term of half-life. In other words, how much time does it take for half of the biomass to be broken down, right? And some of these are really fast. So this is a family of aquatic plants, Hydrocaritaceae, I believe. These are aquatic plants. So not surprising. Why is it maybe not surprising that aquatic macrophytes break down a lot faster than terrestrial ones? Any thoughts? Yeah, exactly. They're not as coarse, right? They don't have to worry about desiccation, and they don't have to worry about staying up in the air, although that's mostly the trunks. But yeah, so they're a lot softer. And the desiccation part is interesting. I hadn't thought as much about that. But they definitely have a lot fewer of those hard structural compounds. Anywho, yeah, so but then some of these, the pines, right? So pine needles, what are they on the order of? They're on the order of like 500 days to get broken down halfway. So if pine needle falls in the stream, I don't know, man. It's probably getting washed down to the Mississippi or down to the dam, right? It's not going to get broken down fast. But these aquatic macrophytes really quickly. So yeah, anyway. So the average of non-woody plants is about 65 days half-life. So you think about how long this energy is going to be available, you know, a few months, and that's mostly gone. Although half-life's so weird, right? Because it's an exponential decay curve. So yeah. On the other hand, the leaves from our woody trees are going to be out about 150 days. So it's interesting. This isn't a long-term pulse of energy. It's not just going to be available short-term. Just look at a couple. So rhododendrons are, you know, as you might tell, like the waxy leaves, right? Those things, they're going to be around, I don't know, it's an exponential, it's a weird scale here, but more than 200 days, right? So those things, when they fall in, they might be around the next year. So these leaves, it's not like a short-term thing. These are the rushes. They're like the toughest of the non-woody plants. So, you know, they're out there, again, over 200 days. So, yeah. Yeah, I believe this is just the leaves, I think. Right. Yeah, I'd have to look up this reference to know exactly how they did it. But my understanding was that, and I think the way it's discussed is that these are the leaves of them. Although some of them like rushes, like it's the whole thing. But yeah. So I think this is based on the leaves, but I could look that up to see exactly what this was. And you can see there's some variation too in some of these families. I looked up the Tiliaceae. Anybody know what the Tiliaceae are? I looked it up. I'm still not quite sure I know. It's some weird family of plants. They're weird. Okay. But anyway, yeah, the main point is here that there are some that are going to be available and broken down quickly, right? So when those aquatic macrophytes come in, whereas others are going to be slowly producing energy over a really long time. We've got lots of rhododendrons on our streams, right? But they're not dropping their leaves every fall. Do rhododendrons drop their leaves seasonally? I see there's no real pattern, right? It's just kind of, so that's going to be like a long, slow burn of energy available. Whereas, yeah, some of these, some more of these things, you know, are going to be in there, going to be available for like short energy. Anyway, a lot of variation. So yes, we said that already. I think you knew that. Did I not show that already? What? That's weird. Sorry, forget about that. So we think about CPOM retention. What kind of things are going to affect how long the CPOM stays in the channel? Temperature, so it'll break down faster at warmer temps? Is that the mechanism? Mm-hmm. Water discharge, yes. Storm events, absolutely. Our paper of the day. Yeah, and that was one of the surprising conclusions, remember, the paper from today, was just how much of the organic matter was continually washed up into the floodplain, which was sort of surprising. Yeah. So I had a research student several years ago, and we were looking at some sites that were slated for stream restoration, and we wanted to try to get a handle on retention. So we used like fake leaves. These were little right in the rain paper triangles, and fake sticks. These are just little dowels. And I'll show the results in just a second. But yeah, Big picture, so flow rate is a big one. Channel characteristics, which can include connection to the floodplain, but certainly the degree of sinuosity versus channelization is going to affect how things move along. Also, substrate in that channel. Right, the paper for today talked about how there was a debris dam that broke down, right? That there had been debris lodged behind some rocks, and then when that broke down, there's a bunch that came down. So the channel structure can be important too, about what that looks like. But this is super duper important, and again, RCC doesn't talk a whole lot about this, but this is pretty important. So another thing, so this is West Asheville. Is this time might still be there? It's Car Wash on Patton Avenue. It's like right across from. There's like a bilo. There's like a anyway. There's a stream back behind there, which y'all may know. The car wash probably drains directly into it now. But so yeah, this is again we were doing some research on Smith Mill Creek, which is this urban stream. We walked down here, and what do we see? But oh, sorry, we saw this first of all. First of all, some data on depth versus mean distance traveled. What my student learned more than anything else is that depth plays a big role in how far it channels, so how far it moves. So so depth definitely played a role, and we didn't really find a difference in the different particles, which was interesting. But depth is super important. Yeah. So this, good question. Something I should have told you. The way we did this experiment was we literally dropped them into the stream, and we looked at how far they traveled until they got caught in the channel, until they got entrained in the channel. So it turned out flow wasn't important, substrate wasn't really important, depth was the only thing. Back to the stream. So we came down and we saw this. What's going on here? What do we say when we walk down to the stream? Damn. Yeah. There was, it's pretty crazy. There's a beaver dam in the middle of this crazy urban stream in West Asheville. And so, you know, beavers are something that used to be very, very common on our landscape, but aren't at all. So authors talk about natural streams. You probably got a lot more retention than you know, historically than you do now, because these beavers used to be on the landscape making these dams. We don't like them because they make the water back up behind the dams, and we like to build our houses near streams and wetlands, and we don't like it when we get water in our houses because we're terrestrial organisms. So because of that, we like relocate beavers generally when they build dams near where people live. We may relocate them up to their creator. But yeah, so a lot less beaver on our landscape than there used to be. And you know, this is like an urban stream without, you know, they're building this thing out of like, oh, I had another picture, but it shows there's like boards and stuff in this dam. I'm like, beavers don't care. They just build dams. That's what they do. Right? Here we go. Us humans must build dams too. Interesting. They didn't use this piece of wood. So yeah, so this is a really interesting kind of temporal dynamic that used to occur. It doesn't anymore. All right, so the leaf falls into the stream. Now imagine that we were to look over about 8 months, the life of a leaf. Actually, no, the leaf is dead. This is the life of a dead leaf. That's a weird way to think about it. But it's creating life because its molecules are in turn giving rise to other living organisms. Anywho, so it falls into the stream. What happens first is that it's colonized by microbes. And so we get all these bacteria, all these things, all these fungi, which colonize it, and they start breaking it down. And then, of course, as that goes, as they respire it, that carbon is getting mineralized to CO2. Along the way as well, the soluble organic components are being dissolved into the water as well. Keeps going, keeps going. Invertebrates typically don't colonize these leaves until after there's been some microbial activity already. The microbes they soften it up a little bit. And interestingly enough, they increase the protein content of the leaves by their little microbial cells because they are high in protein. And when they colonize it, they make the leaf surface high in protein. And so ultimately, it's going to be converted to FPOM in this example about 8 months later. But there's this process, this is called conditioning of the leaf, because it's breaking down, it's losing dissolved organic matter, it's softening, it's being colonized by microbes, then eventually invertebrates, and then it kind of keeps on going down. So the idea is, based on this average deciduous leaf, after 8 months or so, it's been about 30% or so of the weight that's been mineralized. It's moved into CO2 form. Okay, so it turns out invertebrates feed selectively on these conditioned leaves. This is looking at bacterial and fungal biomass over time. And so you can see it increases pretty dramatically. And the interesting thing about this is it's been hypothesized that shredders get more nutrition from the microbes than they do from the leaves. So they're not necessarily just eating the leaf. Really, they're getting the most benefit from those microbes that are on the leaves. Kind of like if you were to eat a log that has mushrooms growing on it, you get more nutrition from the mushrooms than you would from the log. Just saying. This is the analogy that's used, I kid you not. So here's a little peltoperlid stonefly. It's the peanut butter cracker analogy, right? When you eat peanut butter and crackers, where do you get more nutrition from? The peanut butter. You get more carbohydrates, more protein from the peanut butter, right? But you eat the cracker, I don't know, the crunch is nice. Sometimes they're seasoned in creative ways that taste nice. So, it comes on over here and it's like, peanut butter and crackers. And it looks a lot like a cockroach, actually. These are actually known as the cockroach stoneflies because they look like cockroaches. But it's not all about the cracker. It's as much about the peanut butter. So next time you hold up a broken down leaf in a stream, which I know you do every day, think, peanut butter and crackers. Yes. Yep. That's the bacteria and the fungi, and yeah. And so those are often the ones that you pull them up. They've got holes in them already because the shredders have been hitting them, Yeah. And later on in the fall, you'll see these leaf packs where the leaves pile up behind a rock, and you can kind of pull those up, and you'll find tons of invertebrates there. It's pretty awesome. So anyway, the paper touches on this briefly, but we know that invertebrates play a big role in decomposition because of experiments using insecticide, that when you put those in streams, breakdown stops. These are data looking at density and biomass of shredding invertebrates related to breakdown rate. This is mass per day. And so you can see, right, that when we have, with regards to biomass, about 10 times the macroinvertebrate biomass, we've got 3 to 4 times the rate of breakdown, right? So you might have heard of the importance of biodiversity to ecosystem function, the importance of having lots of species around to make our ecosystems function properly. Our ecosystems in streams would work a lot differently if we didn't have these shredders around. Just a little more data on that. This is, this kind of is discussed in the paper as well. But this is a study where they treated streams with an insecticide and looked at breakdown rates of different leaves. And so essentially the half-lives, the amount of time it took for half of the leaf to decompose, for some of these was 4 times greater. So which of these species did the invertebrates have the biggest impact on? The rhododendrons, right? And they're the ones that, remember, took so long to break down. So especially with some of these species that have real tough leaves, they're just going to be stuck in the stream forever if we don't have invertebrates, right? So they're super duper important.